Today's homily is adapted from a sermon I gave in February 2019 at the UU Fellowship of Poughkeepsie. I don't think any of us in this Zoom room, or at least I hope not, would disagree with me when I say that the United States has all manner of sins to atone for in our actions around the world. But possibly the most horrific sin is our nation's treatment of Africans, African Americans, and other people placed in the black category. The history of this nation is a history of domination, annihilation, oppression, violence, torture, exploitation, and ransom. Let's skip the treatment of indigenous people for now, because that's another sermon, and look closely at the slave industry and the free labor that founded this nation. Fortunes, many of which continue to be passed on generation after generation, were built on the backs of enslaved people. They were deemed 3/5 human, so as not to grant them any rights. Families were forcibly broken up, children taken away from mothers so they too could serve as slaves. Black people were tortured, raped, and punished, lynched and dehumanized, and research now shows us that this level of trauma changes one's DNA. The trauma of this history gets passed on generation to generation, not just in the psyche or in the structural violence manifested in the United States institutions, but also in the very cells of people. Once slavery was abolished, the United States government found ways to continue to oppress and disenfranchise Black people through Jim Crow laws, separate and unequal policies and practices, and a justice system that unfairly and unequally punished people of color, especially men of color. When I attempt to have conversations with family members or childhood friends, which I have stopped doing, by the way, for my own sanity, the common refrain is, "Oh, that was a long time ago." And they'll add things like, "It's time to let that story drop. They need to move on." Or even, "Look around. If their neighborhoods are filthy and dangerous or there's crime there, it's their own fault." Or some more recent chestnuts referring to how others of us had it rough when we first came here and we did okay. Actual quotes. People who say these things seem to forget that abolition was only 150 years ago, that legal lynching without repercussion continued until 1969 and continues to this day every time a cop kills an unarmed Black person with no consequence. That they forget that when slavery ended, no system was put in place to give Black people a new beginning, a means to become part of the society that oppressed them. Rather, more systems were put in place to, well, keep them in their place. We love to, as a society, cling to the bootstrap mentality and then use that against people who were denied the opportunity to even get a pair of boots. My white family and friends, and probably all white people to a degree, even us super activist, liberal, religious folk, still cannot fully see our privilege and how white supremacy has served and continues to serve us all. In our reading today, my friend Dave, a Peace Education colleague rather, Dave Ragland, quotes a Seattle rabbi as saying, "For some of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we resist the truth because to accept it means we'll need to shift the status quo and make substantial sacrifices." And many other white people are paralyzed by the knowledge that the full damage caused by slavery, segregation, mass incarceration, and police brutality will never be rectified. Dave, in the second half of his article, states, "The midpoint between truth and reconciliation is reparations." He continues, "I have come to understand that spiritually rooted grassroots reparations must be based in a moral framework of abundance, Yet contemporary American life and economy operate from an assumption of scarcity. Most people today understand that winning, which implies that somebody has to be losing, is a core feature of our institutional processes. In August 2016, an article entitled "No Vacancies for Blacks: How Trump Got His Start and Was First Accused of Bias," the New York Times reported how our current president, his father, and members of his family profit from housing discrimination. What do those benefits from a white supremacist system owe? If structurally violent conditions like gentrification lead to the explicitly violent conditions we face with police and to poverty, then what does solidarity look like? Those are great questions, Dave. What would it look like to foster reconciliation through reparations? What can we learn from truth and reconciliation commissions or the practice of restorative justice, both of which actively affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all persons? Dave gives an example from Germany. When the wall came down between East and West Germany, the West Germans, knowing that integration would lead to social unrest, created a solidarity tax to address the decades of deprivation experienced by the East. What might solidarity look like? Can we ever have solidarity without reparations? Can we actually become a unified society without fully reconciling with our past? A cursory glance at the state of our nation and even the world could tell us no. How do we address this? I had never heard that information about the German solidarity tax, and it kind of blows my mind. Something like that, the very idea of making it possible to integrate people into society, has been bandied around with the language of reparations, but has never, ever been truly and seriously addressed in this country. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who most of us know as a leader in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, offers some wisdom on reconciliation. Forgiving and being reconciled to our enemies or our loved ones are not about pretending that things are other than they are. It is not about patting one another on the back and turning a blind eye to the wrong. True reconciliation exposes the awfulness, the abuse, the hurt, the truth. It could even sometimes make things worse. It is a risky undertaking, but in the end, it is worthwhile. Because in the end, only an honest confrontation with reality can bring real healing. Superficial reconciliation can bring only superficial healing. So I want to return to something Dave wrote. The midpoint between truth and reconciliation is reparations. Reparations might be our place to start or continue. If we see ourselves as justice workers committed to eliminating white supremacy, committed to the liberation of oppressed people of color, then maybe we start with giving where it is truly needed. Maybe we do that here, starting in Kingston, finding examples of how it can be done. What would it take for us to start a program like that? What else can we do?